Sam Ward stood at his window, his rough palms resting on the sill as he watched the dusk settle. 45 winters had passed through him, and this one felt the longest yet. His beard was going white at the chin, and his shoulders carried grief like it had weight, which it did. 3 years ago, he'd buried his wife beneath a cottonwood tree that bent toward the creek like it too had broken in two. Since then, Sam had lived in silence, not because he couldn't speak, but because there was no one worth speaking to. The cabin bore the shape of her memory. Her woven shawl still hung on the back of a chair he never sat in. A shelf of dried herbs gathered dust, untouched since her hands last arranged them. He still slept on one side of the bed, though the other had long gone cold. There had been a child once, too, a daughter who'd never taken her first breath. After that, Sam stopped building cradles. He built fences, mended saddles, and kept to himself. The town whispered about the quiet man who rode in once a month and spoke only when coin changed hands. Some said he'd gone mad with grief. Some said he'd always been that way. That night, as the sky bruised into nightfall, he heard it, a sound not belonging to the wind. Faint, halting. He thought it might be a coyote at first, limping across the hard earth, but as he stepped out, shotgun in hand, more from habit than threat, he saw her. She lay in the snow beneath the cedar by the barn, curled inward like the wind had carved her hollow. Her dress was torn at the sleeve, and blood soaked the fabric from shoulder to wrist. Barefoot. Young. Still as the deer he used to hunt in lean years. For a long moment, Sam simply looked at her, unmoving, the way a man stares at something he cannot believe is real. And then he lowered the gun. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask where she came from. He just lifted her with careful arms, as if afraid she might fall apart from a touch. She weighed less than sorrow and carried the scent of river water and smoke. When he crossed the threshold of the cabin, it felt like bringing a storm inside. He laid her near the hearth and wrapped her in the only blanket not steeped in memory. She stirred faintly, her lips dry and cracked, murmuring in a language he didn't speak but felt in his bones. Comanche, maybe, he hadn't seen any of their people near this land in years. Not since the soldiers came through and drove them out in the name of peace. But this girl, no more than 20, had the look of someone running from more than soldiers. He poured a basin of warm water and gently washed the blood from her skin. There was a gash on her arm, deep, but not fatal. It had bled enough to weaken her, but the wound was clean. He stitched it with the quiet skill of a man who had once done this for a living, before the war, before the farm, before everything. She watched him through half-lidded eyes, flinching only once when the needle met flesh. He said nothing. She said nothing back. When he finished, he stepped outside to wash his hands in snow and let the wind clear the weight from his lungs. The moon was rising, casting long shadows on the prairie. He stared at the cedar tree for a long time. It had once been his wife's favorite. She'd planted wildflowers around its base every spring. They never came back after she died. Inside, the girl had curled closer to the fire, asleep now. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Sam stood in the doorway for a while, one hand on the frame, then moved to his chair by the fire and sat. He didn't try to sleep. He didn't watch her either. He just stared at the flames and remembered the last time he'd shared this room with someone else's breath. He told himself she'd be gone by morning. But morning came, and she remained. She woke before the sun did, sitting upright with a sharpness born of fear. Sam had left a piece of cornbread and some jerky on a plate beside her. She reached for it like a trapped animal might, quick, cautious. He sat at the table drinking coffee, not watching her, but not ignoring her either. When her eyes met his, there was no demand in them, no plea, no gratitude. Just an uneasy truce between strangers. "You're safe here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "For now." She didn't answer, but she didn't run. The snow thickened that day. Sam tended the livestock, checking fences, and breaking the ice in the water trough. He worked slow, methodical as always. When he returned, she had swept the hearth clean and folded the blanket. He noticed her watching the cupboard, the shelves of dry goods. Hunger was a silent thing, but it carved lines in the face just the same. He made a stew that night, beans, salt, pork, wild onion. She ate slowly, her movements precise, almost ceremonial. He noticed how she chewed only one side of her mouth and suspected a bruise on the other, hidden beneath her dark hair. He didn't ask who had hurt her. She didn't offer. That night, the storm worsened. The wind howled like a thing grieving its own voice. Sam stoked the fire and gave her the bed. He slept in the chair. It was not a kindness, he told himself, just practicality. The bed was warmer. She was healing. That was all. In the middle of the night, he woke to find her standing at the window. Her silhouette was sharp against the firelight, her eyes scanning the horizon, watching for something, or someone. He rose slowly. "You expecting trouble?" She turned to him, then really looked at him. There was a long silence, heavy and fragile. Then she nodded once. Sam considered that he had known trouble in many forms, war, hunger, loss. But this felt different. This was not his trouble. Yet somehow, it had already made its home in his life. He crossed the room and pulled a blanket from a chair. "You'll stay tonight. We'll figure out the rest come morning." She looked at him with something unreadable, not trust, not yet, but not fear either. He returned to his chair, leaned his head back, and listened to the crackle of the fire as the wind beat against the walls. Something in him had shifted, though he couldn't name it. The silence no longer felt like mourning.